Hello and welcome to Diplomata. I'm Francis Uni. Since its independence, Timor-Leste has sent some of its best sons and daughters to countries all over the world to represent its interests. Many of these Timorese diplomats have come out of the struggle for independence, and each of them has an interesting and unique story in that long and difficult journey to freedom. The diplomat I'm talking to in this episode is no exception. Ambassador Abel Guterres will tell us all about his fight and also his work as Timor-Leste's representative. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for doing this interview. Let's start the conversation with your childhood, if you don't mind sharing with us briefly about your childhood.
Well, my childhood, I was born in Baguio, in a place called Kaikasa, and life was as a young child growing up in that environment. It was happy times here, and because you need to go to school, often you walk to school, and I think once I ran away from school and I got belted, I got whipped. You know those chicote, I got whipped. So my luck was that I had my brother's short pants, so it was quite big. So when the whip hit me, it has a less impact on my skin. So that was my luck. But man, it was painful. But those are the experiences. And then we live like everybody else in the village. You go to school, and this is what I often think. You live in two worlds. Mundurua, two worlds. When you are in a classroom, you live the Portuguese world because you must speak Portuguese to learn. So then once you get out, you are in a Timorese world, which is completely different, and you express in Makassar. That's a language. So next day you go back to school, you forgot, and then you get whacked. So that's what I see as being living in two worlds. A world of colonizing powers, culture and language and so on, and a world of your own culture and your own environment. So that was an interesting. So I mean, after reflecting, once you get older, you reflect on these things. Yeah.
How do you think your education influenced you in your later involvement in the politics, in your view about Timor-Leste or the world at the time?
Okay, I as a child, I had ambition. My ambition was plenty of buffaloes, okay? Karau Timor. Plenty of buffaloes to do the rice paddies, because then you have lots of food. Yeah? If you do more rice paddies you do with the buffaloes, and the more you get the food. So that was always my ambition. So then I started work as a school teacher. Yeah, I was 16. I did my first year teaching in Suai. And then the second year I went to Wakala, which is the border between Luru and Baguio. And then the last one was in 1974-75 in Kaibada Waimua in Bokau. Yeah. So that's when the whole political spectrum took place in Timor-Leste. Then, by chance, I never dreamed that I would end up in Australia. So those were the times that it's like your destiny. Yes, I never dreamed that I would be on a plane and went to Australia and never come back for 24 years. So it was, one of those things in life.
And tell me, how did you get involved in politics? Was it just by accident? Was it a thought through choice? How did it happen?
No, at the starting point in 1974, I mean, after the Portugal Carnation Revolution, it brought the freedom to the colonies for people to express their views and in the political spectrum. And so, you know, you have a little bit of an understanding of the politics at the time. And politics at the time was Timor-Leste wants its freedom and independence, but not really as great. Yeah, and then when I got to Australia in 1975, of course, without a word of English, it was difficult. But because being young, you know, you learn fast. You make friends fast. You learn fast, and then I start to understand. Because there was a friend who was immigration and resettlement officer called Frank Wosiski. Now, Frank looked after us. Yeah. So for some reason we became good friends. So he started to tell me about Australian politics between different parties. And as we talk, my mind also started to develop, okay, that means that Timor-Leste, how are we going to continue the struggle? Because by that time, the invasion already taken place. And then we had no more news. No news, no reporting, public reporting, because the journalists were killed. On 16th of October 1975, they were killed. And therefore, no journalists reporting from Timor-Leste to the world. Yeah. So it was complete darkness, except Radio Maubere would still have a link until 1978. Yeah.
In those periods where you heard not much about Timor, how did you keep the struggle? I understand that in Australia, the struggle, the movement for Timor's independence was quite big. How did you keep that struggle going?
Okay, for me, first thing was to learn English. Yes, and I did my English like a medium English language course at the RMIT, Royal Institute of Technology, which you attended in the same place, but those days they were a small place. Yeah. And so the number one was to learn the language so that you can easily communicate. And number two was we need to be legally protected because at the time the Timorese community was regarded as evacuees. So when you have that classification of evacuees, means you can be sent back anytime. Yeah. So our aim was to gain the permanent residence so that you have a legal protection. Yeah. So that when you engage in politics, but in our cases, to talk about Timor-Leste. Yeah. And that means you have to have some kind of grounding that if you say something against the host government, you're not going to be deported. Yeah. So that was the thing that we did, and by 1977 we start to engage. But before that, we start to get to know our Solidarity friends, and Australia East Timor Association in Melbourne, and I got to know them and meet them, and then because they were quite persistent, but that also influenced us that, well, these people have never been to Timor-Leste before, and they were giving their time, their effort, their money on this issue. So being a Timorese, you have a moral responsibility and duties to do even more. Yeah. So then I start to learn more and more understand more and more how to engage and learn about lobbying, the politicians, the church, the trade unions. So whoever wants to listen, you go and talk to them about it. So that was a learning process, and also understand the issues and articulate that, to the community, because our aim is to gain support, for us. So that's how my awareness of politics, but politics in turn of Timor-Leste's struggle for freedom and independence under the occupation, the human rights violations. And so from that point onwards, it was just every routine that you being outside and you live a comfortable life, you make the decision whether you want to do something. Yes, because no one can force you. Yeah. So you do because your conscience tells you that you have a responsibility to your people back home. They need help. And so on that basis that you make the decision and you go for it. Yes. And you don't step back. Because once you understand, like in how we use, so once you speak, you cannot take back. Yeah. So that's the kind of thinking. So that means that your dedication is continuous. Yes. And so, I played a small part in it, but in the end, we won our freedom and independence.
Yeah. How did you connect with the Timorese in Timor, and how did you link the struggle back then?
Between late 77, things were start to be difficult, and there was completely new news blackout. So we had no idea what was happening. But you just feel in yourself that they wouldn't be killed all. Someone will still be alive. Someone would be still in the bush fighting. That is the thinking, yes? So you're trying to think positively that someone in Timor-Leste is still alive. It's not possible that they will wipe out everybody. So that give you the hope, yeah, to not give up. Yeah. So then by 1980, I got a phone call from Vicente Mobosi, a cousin, a family member. He was in Bali. He called me, and I was, wow, first time I hear someone from family, And then he was telling us the story. He said that our friends, our brothers, sisters in the bush, still fighting. Don't give up. I said, man, that's great, So that confirmed what we were thinking. Yes, that someone is still alive, the fighting is still going on. And so 1980, that was also the first time I visited New Zealand. Yeah. So then I went to New Zealand to visit my then wife, family from New Zealand. So I went to visit the family, and then I link up with our Solidarity friends in New Zealand. So again, you see those people, they said still, wow, they're still strong and they want to help. So that again give you the boost, yeah, to keep going and never to give up. So again, it's, when you work with our Solidarity friends, it's a exchange or interrelated inspiration to each other. Yes, yeah, and they inspired us because Timor-Leste is not theirs. They are not. They're just a friend. Yeah, but they have the conscience of humanity, so they help us. Now, as a Timorese, you have a primary responsibility, yeah, to your families, your friends, your country. Yeah. So in that sense, you cannot give up. Yeah? You have to keep pursuing the goal to the end. Yeah. And that's how you sustain your thinking. Yeah. because you can easily give up because it was difficult. Yes, because you don't often get the news. Yeah, and so to convince the public is even worse. But with the persistence of our solidarity friends and those of us, Timorese, who were not great many, they were a small group, but they were persistent, yes, in pursuing the struggle.
Apart from good experiences and good things that happened, there certainly were bitter times as well. Would you please share with us some of those, the hardest times, the hardest days of being a Timorese living in Australia?
I had to have probably an experience that some other people had in a different times. I never came across some bad elements. For some reason, I always found good friends, whether they are politicians, members of parliament, or local trade union organization, or the church organization. Church organizations means the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church. And Protestant Church was quite vocal in supporting us. Yeah, very, from top to bottom. It was really good. And so in that environment, but you also learn to adjust to the circumstances, to the world politics at the time, because it was not easy, given that Timor-Leste was only a tiny dot on a map. Yeah. And so persistence was the key, to keep persisting, but also mental exercise, yes, and to whoever you meet along the way, students. I mean, I went to visit many schools, yeah, and sometimes some of those students then become politicians and become ministers. So then, you have access, because you feel you build that friendship in a longer period of time, but it requires sacrificing. Yes, sometimes your children don't see you for weeks, because you leave home very early in the morning, you get back home at night time, and then early morning you got to leave again. So so, but this is part of, you have to make that sacrifices, but those sacrifices compared to those here in the clandestine operations and in the bush, it's no comparison, because you know that you still wake up in the morning, you feel safe, where here in the country is different. Yes, you don't know whether you live tomorrow. And same as those who, with the armed struggle in the bush, they don't know whether they live tomorrow. So, so when you think about all these things, the sacrifice you made in comparison to those inside is nothing. It's nothing in comparison. Yeah. So you keep going, and you don't stop. Yeah. But let me say this: Australia. There is two sides of Australia. Okay. Two sides. So one coin with two sides. Okay. One side is Australia, the state of Australia, and the other side is the people of Australia. Yeah. So when you talk about the state, no emotion. State don't have emotion. But as a people, yes, there is an emotion. Yeah. And so state have no emotion means that the decisions often is not to our liking. But with the people, yes, we get their support, because Australian Timor-Leste, as a people, we have a very special friendship, yes. The friendship that emanated from the Second World War, when Australian troops were here, fighting the Imperial Japanese army, and they survived because the locals support them, feed them, and make sure that they stay alive and went home. Yeah. So that is the sense of friendship between the two countries as a people. Yeah. And of course, as a state, the politics was different. Yeah. But we continue to bet on the goodness of the people. That prevailed.
When the Timorese moved from Timor to Australia, there were people from different parties, factions. How did you unite that in Australia? Because towards the end of our struggle for independence, all the Timorese stood as one, rather than two or three different groups. How did that happen?
Yeah, I think it was quite difficult. It was quite difficult because most people that went, of course, the whole Timorese community that went to Australia, I would say 70% were the Timorese Chinese, Timorese from Chinese origin, and the other 30% were, Timorese. So in that crowd, you still had the vivid memories of what happened here between Fiveteen and UDT, and so it was difficult to erase that quickly. Yeah, the sentiment was quite deep, but we had to learn to not allow those small internal feelings to overcome us in not pursuing the struggle. So we had to bypass that, and keep working, for the struggle for the freedom of the country. Often it's difficult because sometimes you need the numbers, of people, and so on. And but like everything in life, you learn, you adjust. Yes, and this is exactly how we did, especially in Melbourne, Victoria, which you did the study there, and we operated quite well to bring everybody on board for the same purpose. You don't identify which color you belong to. There's only one color, that is Timor-Leste's freedom. Yeah. And so we were able to do that. And of course, around Australia with our solidarity friends, our Australian friends, who never gave up on us. And together we worked hard. We got to the point of our freedom.
And just to wrap up the conversation, how did you end up being in Melbourne instead of the other states of Australia?
So funny thing is, when we left Baucau, we went to Darwin, and then in Darwin we were there for 38 hours, and then at about midnight, they start to asking us, which cities of Australia you want to go to. So there's a group of us, we look at each other and say, well, we don't know what cities. But then there was a Brazilian couple who were there, they could speak Portuguese, so we could communicate with them. And then they advised that, well, Melbourne is the best place. The best place in the sense that you can work, there's plenty of jobs to do, and it's an easier place to live. So we look at each other, well, maybe we go. And then everybody said, yeah, let's go to Melbourne. That's it. So you end up in Melbourne, but it's a cold place. Yeah. So that was a different experience because it's cold. But funny thing is, when we arrived, this was in September 1975, so it was springtime. So we landed, the Salvation Army, the Red Cross, they came in because we came from a hot climate, so they put blankets over us. Then what? The heating inside the building temperature was getting higher and higher and getting hot and hot. And then everybody's getting sweating, but everybody's too scared to get the blanket off. Ah, it was so funny. and then one security guy saw everybody perspiring, so he came and said, "No, you can take this off." You see, because you go into a place, big city, big airport, man, everything was totally different. Yeah. So that was the influence of the Brazilian couple that got us to Melbourne. Now, we got to those days. They still had the migrant hostels. It means that the migrants who came from Europe or wherever, they all stay in this hostel where they get the food, the accommodation. And so we were accommodated in one of those hostels. And then they give English classes during the day and at night time. And so the only thing was the hostel that we stayed in, there was no rice. Yeah. So people were desperate to eat rice. There was no rice. Yeah. And so they don't cook rice. And so we, one of the Timorese ladies, one day I walked past the room. I smelled rice cooking. Yeah. So I thought I knocked the door. And then she opened the door and then we started talking. Then I look at how she cooked the rice. So she got a pot, a small pot. Those days was no rice cookers. A small pot. And she used the ironing, the striker iron. She put it upside down and cook on it. And I couldn't believe. I said, "Wow, what a creative!" So that is just to illustrate. You come to go through all sorts of things. Yeah, and then so you live, you adjust. Yeah, because it wasn't easy. Yeah, because you coming from the bush into a big town, different culture, everything was completely different. Now, on Sundays, how do we go to Mass? So on Sundays, there was a place called Clayton, they do Italian Mass. So with Italian Mass, you can understand. Yeah. So then every Sundays, we all get on a train and go there. Yes. And then that's how we go. We go to pray and so on, because English you wouldn't understand. So that's how, life started in a new country.
There are a lot of other things that would be lovely to share, but for this episode, we would have to end it here. Thank you very much for sharing all this. Would you please tell us, how did you begin your diplomatic career? How did you enter this world?
Okay, diplomatic career is, I guess, it's a continuation of what we did from 1975 onwards as activists. Being an activist, you have to do a lot of learning about diplomacy, about international relations, and about international politics at the time. So not in a formal setting, but mostly in the informal setting, because for us as an activist, our job is to convince other people to support us. And support us means to support Timor-Leste's quest for freedom and independence. And so that was the goal that we did. So means that we receive reports from here, from the headquarters, from Mount Junana Guzmão, from the other commanders, describing the the military activities, the human rights violations, the killings. And so we read, then you do a mental exercise and then transform that into, in other words, to tell international community or anyone who wants to listen what was happening inside Timor-Leste. Yeah. So being a diplomat was the beginning of understanding how diplomacy works and how to convince other people to support you and support your struggle for freedom and independence. So in Australia, it was extra difficult because you had an Australian government as a state. Australia was the only country that recognized Indonesian sovereignty over East Timor. So that means our work was even harder to do that. But despite that, we didn't give up. We keep pursuing the work. Yeah. Because those days, it was difficult to predict when we would have gained our freedom. The only thing that we had was having the belief that doesn't matter how long it takes, at the end we will be free. Yeah. So you keep persisting in working hard, but not only that, but you also talk with your children. Yeah. So just in case you drop dead, they might keep carrying on, with the struggle. And so this is especially for those of us who are engaged, almost on full-time basis in the struggle. So the learning of lobbying work. I think this word lobbying, I first learned that in 1977. Yeah, because we had to lobby the members of parliament to support our quest to gain permanent residence in Australia. So that's what the word lobbying came in. That's how I started to learn that in those days. And Mr. João Gonçalves, who was the minister here, he was one of those people that we worked together in Melbourne. And then you keep on working and keep on refining the thinking, because you have to find ways and means to keep persisting in telling the stories of what was happening inside Timor-Leste, and tell the international communities everything that was happening here inside the country, and with the objective that you gain support. So that's how we conduct and learn about diplomacy. I remember I visited Fiji in 1985, and I spoke at the University of South Pacific. There was 300 students there from Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, Fiji, and others. Yeah, it was interesting because when I became ambassador and I went to Canberra in 2010, one of those students was Solomon Islands ambassador there. Yeah, so that was it was a very interesting point, because he came straight to me and he said, shook my hand and said, "Yeah, you came to talk to us in 1985." I said, "Wow, there you go." So that's how things have turned out.
Among the Timorese diplomats, you are one of a few who are also involved heavily in the setting up of Timor-Leste's diplomatic missions, especially in Australia, you were one of the main persons who was helping with the setting up of Timor-Leste's embassy. How? Tell us about the experience of setting up that mission.
It was, it was not easy because at the start, Timor-Leste budget was very small, and so there wasn't enough money. But we had to open the embassy and the consulate in Sydney, and so in 2003, Georgia Teme was the first ambassador that went to Canberra, and I went to Sydney as a consul general. And of course, I went first to set up the office in Sydney, and then subsequently helped to set up in Canberra. Now, in Sydney was quite difficult because I went without money, yeah, and so I met with our friends at the New South Wales Premier's Department, Cole Gallatley, who was the Director General at the time, and so we had a conversation, and I told him that I came to Sydney to open up the consulate, but we had no money, and so then he looked at me and said, "So what do you want us to do?" I said, "Well, I'm asking you for help." Yeah. So fair enough. After 2 days, he said, "Okay, come back to see us in 2 days." So 2 days, I went back. We had a coffee. He said, "Yes, we will support you." So we've identified one of the places in one of the buildings that we are working on to set it up as a consulate. But meanwhile, we will put you in a ministerial suite on the 32nd floor. I said, "Wow, that's fantastic," because one of the ministerial suites was empty. So I said, "Wow, that's fantastic." So then I asked them, "Okay, but you realize that we have no money to pay you?" No, this is New South Wales support to Timor-Leste." I said, "Oh, fantastic." So then I said, "But I need staff." I said, "No, we already have one staff to work with you." I said, "Whoa, that's even better." Yeah. So that's how it began, and the other interesting part about that is that then he said, "But you need to get in touch with our protocol director for the transport." So I said, "What do you mean?" So, no, we want you to access the ministerial cars. I said, "Wow, that's even even better." So then I got in touch with Michael Harkins, who was the director of the protocol. So we talked, and he said, "Look, anytime you want to go out somewhere, you let me know. I will assign a car and driver for you." So wow, I know that's you can't ask for any better than that, and it was great. So that's how it started, and then I was in this ministerial suite for 3 months while the consulate was set up in another building. So that was those days. It was very good because Australians, the state of New South Wales, there was Premier Bob Carr was the Premier of the New South Wales, and all of them were very supportive, both the Liberal and Labor side of politics, all support. So Timor-Leste quite enjoyed the support of Australian from all the political spectrums and the people. So and that sort of make it easy, yeah. And then to set up the embassy, we, of course, there was John Stanhope, who was the chief minister in ACT in Canberra, Australian Capital Territory, and so I met with them, with our friends in Canberra, and of course they also lobbied for support. John Stanhope gave us an old library that was empty. So they said, well, we can help you with this. And that's how we established the embassy, and subsequently George Stem went in as our first ambassador in Canberra. Yeah. So then of course, we worked more, but before that, in 2001, after coming back from Oxford, I was in Canberra on an internship at the Portuguese embassy. Yes. Yeah. So I knew the director of the Australian Capital Territory, the authority that looks after all embassy buildings and the land. So I talked to him, already had an idea of where we will set up our embassy. Yeah. And as well as that, also lobby for the support to have the embassy, yeah, as an interim until we build one. And so I identified the land at that time, and then through our friends in the Rotary Club of Melbourne and the Leadership Victoria, this was also an interesting part. So let me tell the story. In 2000, around about February or March, the Rotary Club of Melbourne at the time was Neville Barwick. He was responsible for international cooperation. So I had a coffee with him in a place called Carnegie in the morning. And we talk about the difficulties here, we need support and so on. Then he asked, what else can we do? So I thought, idea came into my head, and I said, I better sow this seed and see what happens. I said, okay, this could be, I'm going to make a suggestion, but this could be the first in the world. It has never been happened before. So he sit up and listen very attentively. I said, can Rotary International Australia and Rotary Club of Melbourne build our embassy in Canberra as a gift from people of Australia to people of Timor-Leste? So he looked at me and said, wow, that's a novel idea. It's very interesting. So we leave it at that. Yeah. Then what happened? 8 years later, they built the embassy. Yes. So it's a matter of how you sow the seed. If it falls on fertile ground, it will grow. And this is exactly what happened, with our embassy. So, and then of course, subsequently, Ambassador George finished his duties. He came back, and then Ambassador Hernani Coelho replaced him. And I was still in Sydney because I was there for 6 years. And then Ambassador Hernani oversaw the building of the embassy. And then in 2010, I went in as ambassador and we inaugurated. So there you go, and then I stayed there for almost 10 years.
You were Timor-Leste's ambassador to Australia when Timor-Leste and Australia entered a very tough negotiation. As the representative of Timor-Leste, can you share with us that particular period of time, your experiences in being the man who had to represent this country?
Yes, on maritime border negotiation, it wasn't easy. It was hard work because to maintain the equilibrium, it's not easy. Yeah, but for me personally, because I lived in Australia, and for that 24-year period, and then plus you have network of friends, all over Australia, and so I knew the difficulties that the two states in that confrontational role because of the dispute, but also know full well that Australia and Timor-Leste are best of friends. That is the basis of Timor-Leste and Australian friendship. So because of that base of friendship, which is very strong, in a way I felt comfortable in, although difficult, but I felt comfortable in working on the issue, in the environment of that dispute. And of course, you know, at times it was not easy. As a diplomat, my responsibility is to maintain the equilibrium, maintain the friendship. Because as I said before, that there's two sides of Australia. There's Australia as a state, Australia as a people. Yeah. And so, so in that context, I knew and I know that there are many Australians who felt the injustice of that dispute. Because it's not, you know, I always emphasize in my public engagement that the disagreement between Timor-Leste and Australia is to do with the unfairness of the dispute. It's to do with the unfairness. So Timor-Leste side see that as being that word, injusticia, unfairness. So not unfairness means it's not an anti-Australia, because on the principle we are best of friends, because this emanated in 1942 during the Second World War, where our people, both sides, built this friendship. So we, those of the generation that followed, we followed their footsteps. So I always emphasize the point of Australian Timor-Leste are not enemies. Australian Timor-Leste are friends. Yes. Now, being friends, there is disagreements on certain things. And certain things, the most fundamental for Timor-Leste is the maritime border issue. Yeah. Because Timor-Leste, as a new state, it needs to establish its maritime boundaries. Because Australia has done all its maritime boundary except for this small piece. And so the emphasis of this dispute is that you know, that we need to work to come to an amicable solution on a win-win basis. And so, but of course, you know, Timor-Leste teams during the negotiation is under Mambot Sunana Guzman, who is, you know, not just anyone, and his leadership was very important in guiding the team, yeah, during the negotiations. And of course, being an ambassador in Canberra, again, it was not easy, but starting from the principle of being good friends, building on that basis, you know, we can work. You know, we can work together with the people. There were, you know, a lot of activities with our solidarity friends, including Australian veterans. So it was quite an extensive work to right the wrongs.
Were there any moment that you felt that Timor-Leste might end up not winning the case?
Of course, I mean, in those kind of negotiations, nothing is guaranteed, yes. But you make your own calculation, It's what you call calculated risk that you take. But of course, under the international law, Timor-Leste was quite comfortable in its position, because the UNCLOS, UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, was quite explicit in terms of equidistance, median line. And so this is where Timor-Leste maintained that argument that equidistance or median line was the right outcome. But nothing was guaranteed until you negotiate the fact, because Timor-Leste and Australia are geographically connected, and you cannot run away from it, whether now or in millenniums to come. Timor-Leste will always be there, Australia will always be there. So in this situation, because you are immediate neighbors and you're friends, then you need to work together to seek an outcome that is win-win for both sides.
How important was the support of civil society groups and people of Australia to the whole negotiation?
Of course, in this kind of environment, you need those kind of support. And of course, our Australian friends, Australia's good thing is that they always go for the underdog. When something that is not fair, they express that straight away that this is not fair. Yeah, and so and Australia is always Australia has a motto of giving a fair go, to others, and so in this respect, although difficult in terms of Australia as a state, but at people's level, we enjoy the support, because Australia is a democracy. We share the same values, and our friendship goes a long way back. So, every single person that is fully aware of the situation, they feel that there is a sense of injustice that need to be rectified, and therefore all efforts has to be made, to come to that point. And I must commend former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull and the Foreign Minister Julie Bishop, because they made a decision to come to the table, to the negotiation, and that was very important, because Australia could just easily say no. Yeah. But the fact that this issue cannot go away, so sooner or later it has to be dealt with, and so I commend Australian government at the time for making that decision and to come to the negotiating table with Timor-Leste. And of course, on Timor-Leste side, it was quite solid. Yeah. All the political sides were supportive, because this was an issue of sovereignty. And that really was very important, in building the process for the outcome we want. Yeah. Because in this kind of negotiation, it cannot be zero-sum game, win and lose. Both sides has to win, because whether you like or not, you are neighbors, and that is forever. And therefore, you have to be prudent enough, astute enough to understand the seriousness that these two countries has to live together for forever to come. So therefore, you want to build a scenario that is comfortable for both sides. And that is very important, because it's not always easy to come to that point. But you know, I played a very small part in it because it's it's not easy. You have to, you know, maintain your friendship as the bottom line, because on that you can build understanding. You know? So you build a friendship on the bottom, and then on top of that, that's like the table. And then on top of the table, you work together to seek an outcome that is plausible, that is satisfactory to both sides. Yes. So that's why emphasis of win-win basis is very important. Yeah. And that's diplomacy, that's negotiation. Yeah. But I can tell you, it wasn't easy. Yeah. Because you, as ambassador, your mind is constantly ticking over. How are you going to overcome this, you know, this issue? Yeah, and it takes a lot out of you. Yeah, your energy, your thinking, because this is happening under your watch, you know. So you have to really think deeply. But I know I must. I humbly acknowledge and bow to Mambochanana for his leadership and the entire team that he works with. It was very, it was a privilege to be part of that small. I played a very tiny, small part in that. Yeah, but the team was very good, including our legal counsel, and but the end of it is international law takes its course, and because not everything is based on law. There is other spectrum of issues that comes with it, other geopolitics that come with it. So it's not a straightforward case. Yeah. Timor-Leste has its own interest, but Australia also has its own interest. Yeah. So both need to come to an agreement that is on a win-win basis. Yeah. And that's exactly how we came to it. And I had the privilege to play a very tiny part of it. Yeah. Yeah. And Mambochanana and the team, the Maritime Border team, Maritime Border Office, MBO, they all, and our legal counsel, they did a fantastic job in us overcoming this difficult issue. And of course on Australia's side also did everything possible for us to come to an agreement. So it's like a take two to tango, you know. It's two ways, and that's what, you know, it boils down to. Both sides need to have goodwill to approach the issue and get to a solution, and that is very important for the relationship, you know, between Australia and Timor-Leste.
Thank you very much for sharing all this interesting information.
It's a pleasure.
That's all from Ambassador Guterres. I hope you have enjoyed the program, and thank you very much for watching. I'm Francis Suni, and I'll see you on the next episode of Diplomata. Bye for now.